Welcome to the MindSpark, bringing you the latest news from around the world. The news hit North America overnight. Canada had sealed off the Alaska Highway, the main land route to Alaska. At border crossings, lines of trucks and cars stretched for miles, headlights piercing the dawn as drivers faced a stark choice: pay a massive new toll or turn back. Videos of tense standoffs between U.S. drivers and stone-faced Canadian officials went viral. The so-called Highway Access and Maintenance Levy was no ordinary fee. It targeted U.S.-plated vehicles, upending the lives of truckers, families, and tourists in an instant. The highway, once a symbol of unity, had become a geopolitical weapon. Truckers with perishable goods and medical supplies were stranded, their cargo at risk. Families relocating to Alaska found themselves stuck, burning through savings in roadside motels. The sense of betrayal was raw. This was no longer a distant political spat, but a crisis unfolding in real time. In small Canadian towns, businesses that relied on American travelers watched their customers vanish overnight. Logistics companies in the lower 48 scrambled to assess the damage to their supply chains. Nowhere was the shock deeper than in Alaska, suddenly facing a blockade. The closure wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct threat to Alaska's economy, security, and way of life. The highway had been taken hostage, and with it, the peace of a continent. The open border, once taken for granted, was now a memory. The crisis had arrived, and no one knew how or when it would end. The Alaska Highway is Alaska's lifeline, a 1,400-mile artery for food, fuel, and everything in between. With the road closed, Alaska was suddenly an island, cut off from the rest of the U.S. by a foreign power. Panic buying emptied grocery shelves within hours. Store managers rationed essentials as residents braced for shortages. For a state that imports 95% of its food, the vulnerability was immediate and terrifying. Construction projects halted, small businesses lost access to critical supplies, and the summer tourism season collapsed overnight. The economic engine of Alaska sputtered, starved of its fuel. The emotional toll was just as severe. Alaskans, known for resilience, now felt betrayed by a nation they'd always called a friend. Anger and frustration simmered in coffee shops and on local radio. Many blamed both Ottawa for the blockade and Washington, D.C. for letting it happen. The sense of isolation was no longer just geographic, it was psychological. The lifeline had been severed, leaving Alaska adrift. The crisis was no longer abstract. It was personal, immediate, and inescapable. Alaska was on its own. This border crisis was the latest escalation in a long-simmering trade war. It began with U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and lumber, meant to protect American jobs, but seen by Canada as a betrayal. Ottawa retaliated, targeting iconic U.S. products with tariffs designed to inflict political pain. The tit-for-tat cycle poisoned relations, hurting businesses and consumers on both sides. For months, the fight was waged on paper, until Canada decided to use geography as leverage. The Alaska Highway, a critical American vulnerability, became the new front line. By imposing a crippling levy on U.S. traffic, Canada could inflict direct pain without technically breaking trade agreements. Washington was blindsided. The simmering dispute became a full-blown geopolitical standoff. The highway, once a symbol of partnership, was now the most contentious stretch of pavement in North America. The consequences were immediate and severe. The tariff war had found its physical battleground. The stakes had never been higher. The world was watching. The new levy was designed to hurt. $500 for a car, $5,000 for a semi-truck, each way. For truckers, the added cost made the journey to Alaska nearly impossible. Small operators were priced out overnight. Larger carriers passed costs to Alaskan customers, sending prices for everything from groceries to building materials soaring. Tourists faced thousands in unexpected tolls, shattering vacation plans. Military families and logistics were thrown into chaos, with the U.S. military's own supply lines disrupted. The Highway of Dreams had become a highway of hardship. In Alaska, contractors delayed projects, restaurants faced skyrocketing food costs, and grocery shelves emptied. The economic pain was everywhere, visible in every empty truck, every canceled order, every anxious family. The Canadian levy was a targeted strike, and it hit its mark. Life in Alaska became a daily struggle against rising costs and dwindling supplies. The blockade was working. The pressure was mounting. The shockwaves didn't stop at Alaska's borders. The port of Seattle, a key hub for Alaskan trade, saw chaos as companies scrambled to ship goods by sea. Maritime shipping costs soared, but couldn't fully replace the lost highway route. In Washington state, businesses built around Alaskan trade faced layoffs and canceled orders. The ripple effect reached as far as Ohio and California, where manufacturers and farmers lost a vital market overnight. The crisis exposed the fragility of North America's interconnected supply chains. Even the Pacific Northwest tourism industry suffered, as Alaska-bound road trips were canceled en masse. Motels, campgrounds, and attractions from Montana to Washington reported sharp drops in bookings. The Canadian blockade had cast a long economic shadow over America's Northwest. The pain was spreading. As the crisis deepened, former President Trump unleashed a barrage of outrage on social media. "Disgraceful. Canada thinks they can hold our great state of Alaska hostage," he posted, blaming weak leadership in Washington. Trump called for massive tariffs on Canadian goods and even suggested restricting Canadian access to U.S. waterways. His fiery rhetoric resonated with many frustrated Americans, especially in Alaska. The political divide deepened. Some cheered Trump's aggressive stance. Others feared it would make diplomacy impossible. Critics pointed out that Trump's own protectionist policies had helped spark the crisis. The debate raged on cable news, turning the highway closure into a national flashpoint. In Alaska, opinions split between those craving a champion and those wary of escalation. Community leaders pleaded for practical solutions, not political posturing. Trump's voice amplified the crisis, but also made resolution more elusive. Behind the scenes, diplomacy stalled. The U.S. demanded the levee's removal. Canada refused, linking it to American tariffs. Talks went nowhere. Each side waited for the other to blink. International allies watched in disbelief as two close neighbors slid toward open hostility. Alaskans took matters into their own hands. Bush pilots organized airlifts, fishing fleets ferried supplies, and private vessels formed a makeshift sea bridge. These were stopgaps, not solutions, but they showed Alaskan grit. In Washington, lawmakers debated drastic measures, invoking old treaties, military escorts for convoys, or a federal airlift. The crisis was spiraling, and the pressure to find a solution was growing by the hour. The world wondered, how far would this go? Alaska's fate hung in the balance. The Alaska Highway remains closed, the shelves understocked, the tolls in place. The crisis has exposed the fragile interdependence of the US and Canada. Decades of goodwill have been eroded in weeks. The immediate priority: de-escalate and get traffic moving again. A compromise will require both sides to step back. Canada suspending the levee, the US reviewing its tariffs. The cost of this conflict is measured in lost jobs, failed businesses, and broken trust. When the trucks finally roll, the real work, rebuilding trust, will just be starting. The world's longest undefended border now bears scars that may last for generations. The highway must become a bridge again, not a barrier. The hope for open roads is a hope for restored friendship. The Alaska Highway was built in crisis as a symbol of partnership. Its future depends on leaders choosing connection over conflict. For Alaska and for North America, the road ahead must lead back to unity. The barriers may be gone, but the aftershocks ripple on. In border towns and remote Alaskan villages, the scars of the standoff are everywhere. Empty storefronts, shuttered sawmills, families forced to move south in search of work. For many, the reopening of the highway brought relief, but not recovery. In Tok, Alaska, local shopkeepers count their losses, wondering if the tourists and truckers will ever return in the same numbers. On the Canadian side, First Nations communities reflect on how the crisis deepened old wounds and tested cross-border kinship. Yet, amid the hardship, new voices emerge. Community leaders organize cross-border markets, reviving trade with small steps. Young entrepreneurs look for opportunity in rebuilding supply chains, determined to make them more resilient. At town halls, locals from both sides share stories, not just of hardship, but of helping neighbors, even when politics kept them apart. Pause once. The economic toll is steep. Job losses, businesses closed, investments delayed. But the spirit of the North endures. Residents speak of lessons learned, about the risks of dependence, and the strength found in cooperation. Slowly, trust is rebuilt, not by governments, but by the people who live along the highway. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of crisis, now becomes a canvas for renewal. Its future, like the future of the border, will be shaped by those who call it home and by the choices they make, together. As the dust settles along the Alaska Highway, the world's gaze lingers on the North. The Canada-US standoff did more than disrupt local lives. It sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and economic forums far beyond these remote borders. In Brussels, the European Union called for calm and urged both North American neighbors to resolve their dispute through dialogue, wary of contagion that could rattle global supply chains. In Beijing, officials watched closely, interpreting the conflict as a sign of vulnerability in Western trade routes, while quietly seeking new partnerships with affected Canadian exporters. Global organizations like the World Trade Organization and the United Nations issued statements of concern, emphasizing the need for open borders and cooperation, especially in an era of mounting geopolitical tensions. International media outlets ran headlines about the highway hostage crisis, sparking debates on national security, economic interdependence, and the resilience of cross-border communities. Meanwhile, indigenous groups from Scandinavia to New Zealand reached out in solidarity to First Nations and Alaskan natives, sharing their own experiences of cross-border challenges and cultural resilience. Pause once. The crisis along the Alaska Highway became a case study in how local disputes can escalate to the world stage, influencing policy, alliances, and the way nations prepare for future disruptions. In the aftermath, Canada and the US found themselves not just accountable to their own citizens, but to an international community that had watched, waited, and learned from their ordeal. As the headlines fade and life resumes along the Alaska Highway, policymakers and industry leaders are left to grapple with the aftermath. The standoff has exposed the vulnerability of North America's once invisible arteries of commerce, prompting urgent questions about the future of continental trade. Pause 0.5s. In boardrooms from Vancouver to Houston, logistics experts debate new routes and redundancies, considering the prospect of expanded rail links, fortified ports, and even technological solutions like drone deliveries for remote regions. Governments weigh the costs of upgrading infrastructure against the risk of future disruptions, aware that a single choke point can ripple through entire economies. Pause 0.5s. The crisis has already accelerated talks of a North American Resilience Pact, an ambitious initiative aiming to streamline customs, boost emergency response coordination, and invest in digital monitoring of critical trade corridors. Yet, skepticism remains. Some fear that tighter security measures could slow movement and increase costs, while others warn of over-reliance on any one route or technology. Pause 0.5s. Meanwhile, communities along the Alaska Highway watch warily, knowing that every policy decision will shape their livelihoods for decades to come. Will the region become a model of cross-border cooperation and innovation, or a cautionary tale of political gridlock and economic fragility? Pause ones. As North America stands at this crossroads, one thing is clear. The lessons of the highway hostage crisis will echo in every debate over trade, security, and sovereignty for years to come. The road ahead remains uncertain, but the choices made now will define the continent's future in a world where every connection counts. In the wake of turmoil and tension, the Alaska Highway stands not just as a corridor of commerce, but as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The crisis that once threatened to divide nations has, paradoxically, laid the groundwork for a new era of understanding, reminding both governments and citizens of the power of dialogue, compromise, and shared destiny. Pause 0.5s. For truckers and traders, families and policymakers, the lessons run deep. Vulnerabilities exposed have inspired innovation. Old rivalries have given way, however tentatively, to new partnerships. The scars of the past remain, but so too does a spirit of determination to build bridges, literal and figurative, that can withstand the storms ahead. Pause 0.5s. Across the continent, communities are finding common ground in their hopes for stability, prosperity, and peace. Initiatives born from crisis are now forging connections between cultures and economies, sparking creative solutions to age-old challenges. The memory of the highway's darkest days lingers, but so does the resolve to never let history repeat itself. Pause says 0.5s. As the North's endless horizon beckons, one truth emerges. Reconciliation is possible, and cooperation is essential. The Alaska Highway, once a hostage of conflict, now leads forward, a road reimagined, paved by hard-won lessons and the promise of a better tomorrow.